Inventing Reality. Section. Do the media manage our minds? The news may be manipulated by the media, but does that mean we are manipulated by the news? If it turns out that press exercises only an inconsequential influence, then we are dealing with a tempest in a teapot, and are being unduly alarmist about, quote, mind management. Early studies of the media's impact on voting choices found that people seemed surprisingly immune to media manipulation. Campaign propaganda usually reinforced the public's preferences rather than altered them. People exposed themselves to media appeals in a selective way, giving more attention and credence to messages that bolstered their own views. Their opinion and information intake was influenced by forces other than the media, things like family, school, peer groups, workplace, and community. The individual did not stand without a buffer against media impact. The press, it was concluded, had only a, quote, minimal effect. At first glance, these findings are reassuring. People seem fairly self-directed in their responses to the media, and do not allow themselves to be mindlessly led. Democracy is safe. But troublesome questions remain. If through, quote, selective exposure, we utilize the media mainly to reinforce our established predispositions, where do the predispositions themselves come from? In part, they come from the media. Furthermore, even the various other socializing agencies, such as family and school, are not immune to the climate of opinion created by the media. Thus, at least some of our internalized political predilections derive from the dominant political culture that the press has a hand in shaping, and from earlier direct media exposure. Because of previous media exposure, we are likely to resist opinions that depart too far from the conventional mainstream view. In such situations, our, quote, self-directed selectivity is designed to avoid information that contradicts the dominant viewpoint. If much of our information and opinion intake is filtered through our previously established mental predispositions, these predispositions are often not part of our conscious discernment, but of our unexamined conditioning. Thus, rather than being rational guardians against propaganda, our mindsets, having been shaped by prolonged exposure to that very same propaganda, may be active accomplices. Furthermore, there are many things about which we may not have a predetermined opinion. Lacking any competing information, we often unwarily embrace what we read or hear. In those instances, the media are not merely reinforcing previously held opinions, they are implanting new ones, although these implants themselves seldom fall upon tabula rasa brains, and usually do not conflict too drastically with established biases. While people may not always be happy with what is in the news, they tend to believe what they hear or read. Surveys indicate that the media enjoy a widespread credibility among the public. One Gallup poll found that, far from being critically skeptical of news sources, respondents gave the major print and broadcast media high marks of 80 to 87% for believability. Recent evidence suggests that, contrary to the earlier, quote, minimal effect theory, the news media are able to direct our attention to certain issues and shape our opinions about them. One study found that persons exposed to a steady stream of news about defense or pollution came to believe that these topics were more important problems than previously thought. Other studies discovered that fluctuations in public concern for problems like civil rights, the Vietnam War, crime, and inflation over recent decades reflected variations in the attention paid to them by the major media. As with issues, so with candidates. We noted earlier that the inability to win press coverage consigns third-party candidates to the dim periphery of American politics. The power to ignore political viewpoints beyond the standard two-party fare is more than minimal, it is monumental. Media exposure frequently may be the single most crucial mobilizer of votes, even if not the only one. One study found that the more people watched television news during the Gulf crisis of 1990 to 91, the more likely they were to support the U.S. war effort, but the less they knew about the underlying issues. In other words, network news bolstered support for President Bush's policy of war, but was not a factor in informing people. The heavy viewers were poorly informed about things that were part of the public record, but had been given little or no airing. The great majority of viewers did not know that Kuwait had been slant drilling into Iraqi oil reserves. Less than a third knew that Israel and Syria also occupied territory in the Middle East. Only 13% knew that the U.S. had misleadingly told Saddam Hussein in July 1990 that it was neutral regarding Iraq's dispute with Kuwait. But these viewers were well informed about the few facts that the news gave them. Thus, 81% knew that, quote, Patriot missiles were used to shoot down Iraqi, quote, Scuds. And most of them believed that Iraq had gassed the Kurds. Thus, they were not completely uninformed, only selectively and poorly informed. The press can effectively direct our perceptions when we have little information to the contrary, and when the message seems congruent with earlier notions about events, notions that themselves may be partly media-created. In this way, the new information is a reinforcement of earlier perceptions. For example, while most Americans had never heard of Saddam Hussein before July 1990, they were prepared to fear and hate him on the basis of what government spokespeople and media pundits told them. But this image of Hussein was also persuasive to them because it was congruous with a long-standing climate of opinion older than the Cold War, one filled with images of a world populated by evil, alien adversaries who threaten the United States and need to be vanquished. Reportage about seemingly distinct and diverse events have a hidden continuity and cumulative impact on the public. To see this reportage as one of, quote, minimal effect, because it merely reinforces existing views and does not change them, is to overlook the fact that it was never intended to change them, but was designed to reinforce the dominant ideology. The, quote, minimal effect is the intended effect. Even if the press does not mold our every opinion, it does mold opinion visibility. It can frame the perceptual limits around which our opinions take shape. Here may lie the most important effect of the news media. They set the issue agenda for the rest of us, choosing what to emphasize and what to ignore or suppress. In effect, organizing much of our political world for us. The media may not always be able to tell us what to think, but they are strikingly successful in telling us what to think about. Along with other cultural, social, and educational agencies, the media teach us tunnel vision, conditioning us to perceive the problems of society as isolated particulars, thereby stunting our critical vision. Larger causalities are reduced to immediately distinct events, while the linkages of wealth, power, and policy go unreported, or are buried under a congestion of surface impressions and personalities. There is nothing too essential and revealing that cannot be ignored by the American press, and nothing too trivial and superficial that cannot be accorded protracted play. In sum, the media set the limits on public discourse. They may not always mold opinion, but they do not always have to. It is enough that they create opinion visibility, giving legitimacy to certain views and illegitimacy to others. The media do the same to substantive issues that they do to candidates, raising some from oblivion and conferring legitimacy upon them, while consigning others to limbo. This power to determine the issue agenda, the information flow, and the parameters of political debate so that it extends from ultra-right to no further than moderate center, is if not total, still totally awesome. End section.